A very important question is, what is the self? So I started, Vipassana meditation because I wanted to answer this question. I wanted to have a technique by which I can explore this question. And so a little background on sort of how I got into that. So I was born in Ethiopia, and I was born, partly vision impaired. I need glasses, but at that time I didn't have access to medicine. This will connect. I know it's like, well, what are you talking about glasses for? But it'll make sense in a little bit. Um, and so not having glasses, the world looked bland. The world looked blurry, boring. Right there can be many words to describe what the world looks like when you cannot see it clearly. And so what ended up happening was, because the world looked ugly, not because it was ugly, but because it just appeared ugly through my eyes, I was hyper focused on my internal self, like on my internal world, my mind, all the things that are happening in there. And so from an early age, I was really hyper focused on the self, thanks in part to needing glasses. And so I wanted to understand, how was it possible that I am existing? Like, what, looking into my mind, and this, I was pretty young, probably around 6, 7 years old. I asked myself, or perhaps I had the realization that my mind is amazing because it allowed me to perceive myself, it allowed me to perceive the world, and it allowed me to perceive myself perceiving the world, right? It was just this fascinating thing. And from a young age, I was able to separate out, the feeling of the self versus these mental faculties, these, awareness and emotions and thoughts and all these things. And I was like, is there a separation, right? Where, like at that time, of course, I wasn't pondering it. Um, but that hyper focus on the inner self, and through no formal way, it was just the way things was. I really couldn't focus on the outside world because I couldn't see, so I focused on the things that I can clearly perceive, which were which was my internal world and my mind and my faculties and all these amazing things. And then after discovering Vipassana, right, it just further built or further strengthened this understanding of the separation um, between, well, not even the separation, right? In Vipassana, there is the idea of non-self. Maybe the self doesn't exist. And since I was young, I was able to, let's say, distinguish the sense of self from my awareness, from my emotions, from my thoughts, from my perceptions, from what was going on outside, right? I was able to um, have that. So I had a very strong sense of self, but at the same time, I noticed that this sense of self was also changing, right? It changed a lot slower than thoughts, right? Thoughts, 1 second, another second, another thought. Like it just changes things in the outside world, going to school, words, hearing people talk, conversing with this person. It changed a little bit slower than thoughts and things like that, but it still changed, and I got older, I got bigger, my body was changing, everything was changing. And that included the self, right? The sense of myself moved a bit slower than everything else, because it's only looking back after a period of time can I see that myself is changing. Whereas, talking to somebody, you can see the words changing every moment. You can, one time you're with them, then you leave, you go home, whatever you do, they're also gone. And so that change is pretty easy to see, but the change of the self takes a long time, a longer time. So then that brings the question of, if the self is also changing, like, is there a self? Like, what is the idea of the self? And the more that I practiced, the more that I started to discover that it was a feeling, right? The thing that I called myself was a distinct feeling, a feeling of self but it didn't actually exist, right? And why I think that, right, is I think that the feeling of the self comes from, the faculty of mind, awareness, all these things, coming in contact. You have some wisdom. As I move through life, I gain deeper understandings. I have these perceptions. I've got these beliefs. Um, all those determine what my sense of self is, right? The beliefs that I have make up who I am. And so as my beliefs changed, my sense of self changed, right? I would start reacting to things differently because I changed my beliefs about them, right? I used to not like vegetables, and then now I love vegetables. And so before, when I came into contact with vegetables, my sense of self, would react and would hate it, and say, why are you making me eat this? But after some time, I've come to like it, and now the reaction, or the feeling in the self is, maybe a little more pleasant. It's a little more joyful, and it's like, yeah, I'm being healthy, I'm eating my good food. And so the feeling of the self, first of all, changes depending on what you're interacting with. And, I noticed different people have different reactions to different things. They have different tolerances for different things. And so from person to person, the sense of self is different. The way that we relate to things are different. But then also within myself, from moment to moment, or, maybe on a bigger time scale, my beliefs and the fundamental things that I know about myself change, and that in turn changes the way that I feel about those, experiences, or those things that are the object of my experience. So it comes down to, this idea of, how can I say that that is myself, right? My understanding of the self perhaps was this, the experiencer, or the eternal, the thing in me that never changes, that sits back and is watching from behind these eyes, and looking deeper through Vipassana, I'm coming to understand that I don't even control anything, right? I have no power over what makes me feel good. Like, I can discover things that make me feel good. But if something makes me feel bad, I cannot decide for it to make me feel good, right? So, like, one of the things, I feel pretty bad when I lie, right? I feel horrible. I cannot, over the long term, decide that lying is going to feel good all of a sudden, right? Perhaps in the specific moment, in the heat of the moment, I lie, and it feels good, but later on, I am always going to regret it, right? I'm always going to regret it. It's always going to come back to me. So I can't choose. I can't say that I want to have the reaction to lying, that I love it, I want to do it more, and I can't make the world bend to that will as well. And, if people find out I'm lying to them, they're going to love it, and they're going to love me more, right? That's not how that works. And so I don't have power to decide the nature of the experiences that I'm having, right? Like, things have their own nature, right? Lying has its own nature. You're going to feel guilty afterwards. If not after a few days, maybe a few months. If not after a few months, a few years, right? At some point. And it might even be until, you're on your deathbed. But there's going to come a point where it's like, okay, maybe I shouldn't have done that, right? And then similarly on the opposite side with good things, right? I could be loving to people, and, maybe in the beginning I might not like that. I might feel, depending on what beliefs I have, that, like me being a man, I might have the false belief that men don't love and don't share love, and I might feel, a certain negativity towards it. But over the long run, I'm going to feel good about loving, right? I'm going to feel good about loving, and I'm going to want to do that. And then when I give love to the world, the world will return in kind, just as, if I lie to the world, the world will, return that in kind. And so these things of what feel good, what don't feel good, these rules, these things that determine, output, input, output, all these things, is not decided solely by me, right? I can choose to live well. I can choose to do the things that encourage happiness, that encourage other people to feel good, but I can't decide to alter those rules, right? I can't decide that lying is going to be great and that loving is going to be horrible forever, right? It's just not going to happen. I might momentarily, right, in some illusion, convince myself of those things being opposite, but at the end of the day, those are the rules. So understanding that there is the way of the universe, there is the way of the world, there is the way of things. Things have their own nature, just like water is wet. I'm not going to complain that water is wet. Like, I'm not going to say, well, I want this to remain water, but now I want it to be a solid, right? Because then that would be ice and it would no longer be water. And so in the same way, it's like, I just have to accept the nature of lying. I have to accept the nature of love. I have to accept the nature of being social. I have to accept the nature of everything, right? Everything has its own nature that, you know, could be said has been predetermined, or that it forever exists in its nature as itself, right? And that's one of the things that Vipassana teaches us, which is the Dhamma, which is the nature of things, which is how things actually are. And so in Vipassana, right, it's like always pointing to, you have this practice to discover how things are. How are they in reality? What is actually happening, right? And so this Dhamma decides this nature. The nature of things decides what the outcomes are going to be, what the expected results are going to be. If I go around lying to everybody and they find out, the expected result is they're going to distance themselves from me. If I go around loving everybody, the expected result, is that they're going to love me back and we're going to be a good community and all of that, right? And sure, there might be cases where somebody maybe loves that you lie to them all the time and loves you instead of distancing themselves, right? But that's not normal. And similarly, somebody who has their own issues, if you give them too much love, they might, not like that and say, well, I'm going to distance myself from you because I can't handle love. But then, something's probably wrong with them, and that's not the expected reaction. So this Dhamma, this nature that determines how things are and the expected results and the expected behaviors around them, is outside of myself, right? I don't make those rules. I have to abide by those rules. And so now this brings the question of then, how does the self exist in this? Is it just a matter of convenience? Is it just something that feels necessary, right? Is it just something that we perceive in order to make sense of the world versus it not actually being there? Like the way that I'm visually seeing things, right? I'm looking at a camera, I'm seeing all these things around me, the walls. This is a creation of my, brain's processing of physical light that is bouncing off of all these things, and it is creating an image, right? And it is a useful image. I can interact with things, I can move around, I can do all these things. But is this actually how these objects are, right? Do these objects actually have color, right? Is color only created because of the convenience for my eyes, because they perceive color? But color maybe doesn't even exist, right? You can get into all these philosophical things of, it could be useful, but ultimately, right, this could be, like vibrating molecules that is 99.9% empty space. Yet I see everything is solidified, right? If I look at this wall, it's 100% solid, right? Like perceptually, it is 100% solid, and I'm going to live that way, right? I'm not gonna try to jump through it because it's 99.9% empty space, and that means there's a 0.1% chance of me hitting something, so I'm going to take that and go through it. No, of course, I'm going to live in that practical world of, hey, this is a solid material, and I am, going to move according to that understanding. So, but in actuality, right, it is just empty space with vibrations. So in the same way, right? That the sense of self, is it actually what we perceive it to be, or is our perception of it a useful experiential thing that we have in order to navigate the world, and that we should act according to that? But then the deeper wisdom is that that might not actually be how it is, right? And so that's why with this idea of the sense of self, right, is from a practical perspective, it's very useful, right? I can feel it, I can go inside myself. I might not be able to put it into words, but I can say, this is myself. I can understand that, this molecular structure here that I am inside, this is myself, right? I can have a very rudimentary understanding of the self, and that is amazing to move around the world in a logical, reasonable way, and to make sense of it. But what is the truth at the depth? And that is where Vipassana tries to take us, right? That is where the path that Vipassana is taking us, is to try to discover, well, what is the truth of the self? And, the Buddha says the truth at the end of the road is that there is no self, right? And so in trying to make sense of that, or even just trying to experientially understand, right, is this ever-changing thing what I call the self? Like, do I call my body the self? Is my body a part of myself? I don't think so, right? My body is perhaps an extension of myself, but it isn't myself. And like this, I go deeper and I say, well, is my awareness myself? No. My awareness is a tool that I possess in order to experience, like, let's say that's what I think awareness is for, right? If I'm aware of something, I can experience it. If I'm unaware, I'm not experiencing it. So it's a tool to experience. Then you go and it's like, well, is it these emotions and is it these thoughts? But they are constantly changing as well. And so it's like, was my belief that I had 5 years ago that I no longer have, was that belief me? Is the belief that I have now me? Even though 5 years from now, I probably won't believe the same thing, right? And so it's like, if I were to try to have a collection and say, well, these are me, and then when I move like 5 years from now, none of this is true anymore, then it's not me, because I'm now over here and this is back here. So it's not me. And so it's like, and I can't escape that. I can't escape that. So Vipassana teaches us to see the beyond the illusion. And is it practical? Do you need to see beyond the illusion, right? Like, for example, you have this wall. Does it matter if you think it's 100% solid, or that 99.9% of it is empty space and 0.01% of it is not empty space, is actually protons and neutrons and electrons and all that good stuff? Like, how does that benefit you, right? How does it benefit you to have this deeper understanding of the self? And if you are living a certain kind of life, it doesn't benefit you, right? It could be seen as useless, or it could be seen as a waste of time. Why does it matter that it is mainly empty space? Like, I can't walk through it. I can't do anything with that information. But I would argue that there's an inner need to understand what the self is, right? Just as perhaps technologically, or just for the sake of knowledge, for the sake of the truth, for the sake of understanding reality, we've gone and we've researched atoms and now quarks and quantum things as well, right? It's just going deeper and deeper. And so the truth itself is the reward. Now, of course, there can be many practical uses to understanding truth at a deeper level, right? Because we have this deeper understanding of the physical world, right? We're able to create these physical computers and the internet and all these things that make life so amazing. Now, does everybody need to know quantum, physics to be able to create the internet and all these things? Of course not. Of course not. People can just be consumers. Now, the thing is, though, that knowledge does further society. Now, when it comes to the self, I'm willing to argue the same thing, that there is progress to be made from having a deeper understanding of the deeper underlying structure of how the self is versus just this surface illusion of, here I am the self, I am the experiencer, I'm, this eternal self that is the same and it exists and I'm doing all these things, right? If you go beyond that, if you see beyond the illusion, it can help you. And here's the ways that it helps you. Now, if you were to have, the understanding that you are this eternal self, then you might take things a little more seriously, right? Somebody might insult you, or somebody, might do something to upset you. And if you take the idea of the self very seriously, then you're going to struggle against it a little more. But now, perhaps, let's say you understand at an experiential level that you're ever evolving and are ever changing, and that there is no need to be so reactive towards, an abuse that somebody shouted, or something that's happened in your life, right? Things change, you change. And so if you have that deeper understanding, things will affect you less, right? You'll be able to distance yourself from your negativity, and you'll be able to create more positivity. And how do you create more positivity? With this deeper understanding of the self. So for me, with my own personal practice, right, I have come to be more joyful, be less serious, be more playful, because you can be more playful when you understand the transient nature of things, right? You can enjoy the moments more, knowing that they will go away, and it gets to the core of the self, because you have to understand at the core of yourself that there is nothing to attach yourself to, right? There's nothing to say, well, this specific belief that I have right now is going to be with me forever, right? It's never going to change. It's not going to evolve. Nope, this is it, right? You do that, then you start being stuck to things. And when the world challenges that, and sometimes for the better, right? The world sometimes challenges us, and then it gives us an opportunity to grow. And if we're so stuck holding on to this solidified understanding, we're going to not hear the lessons. And what that's going to do is create a lot of pain. So in order to move with life's punches, in order to grow and dance with it, right, you have to be flexible. You have to be a little looser. And the only way to do that, well, not the only way, but a way to do that, a very deep way to do that, is to uncover the reality of the self, to uncover how do I function, what are the things that make up who I am, what are my beliefs, what are all these things, and what is the nature of these things, right? And one of the nature of all things is change, right? Everything, like I was saying in the beginning, everything changes, and that is one of the fundamental cornerstones of Vipassana, is anicca, is change. It's gonna happen no matter what. So to live in alignment with that, you have to become a lot more flexible. You have to be able to go more smoothly with the change. And that means sort of a freedom. You have to become free from the trap of attaching yourself to the beliefs that you have. And now, not to say that you can't take your beliefs seriously. You do take your beliefs seriously, but not to the extent that you start to make it, you connect it to the self and say, well, here's a ever-changing self. I'm always short-tempered. That's just who I am. When you start to make these kinds of connections between your behaviors, your beliefs, yourself, and your actions, right? It hinders you when you say, this is just the way that I am. Everybody's imperfect, and this is who I am, right? When you have that strong belief in the self and you're attached to it, you're going to resist change. You're going to resist growth. So, if you have the understanding, well, I am at a phase in my life where things anger me easily, where I overreact easily, and I am going to take steps to change that, because I am malleable, I'm able to change, I'm able to become the person that I want to be. And that allows you more freedom to be in that change and then to evolve to become, the person that you want to be. And so this idea of the self and the non-self. So the idea of the non-self comes from, there is the nature of things. There's the nature of reality. There's the nature of, all the specific objects within reality, all the actions that we can do, all the actions that can happen to us. And there is non-self because you don't decide what that is. You don't decide that, even from a fundamental level, that your awareness is your body and your body is your awareness, right? Your awareness has its own nature, your body has its own nature, and you have to live in alignment, right? You have to do things with your body that the body does. You have to do things with your awareness that the awareness does, and you don't conflict them. So you live in alignment with nature. And so this idea of non-self is, I haven't created anything. I don't have power over anything. I have power to align myself with nature. I have power to align myself with the nature of reality, but that is all I can do. And that's very liberating, because then it becomes simple. Life becomes a little more simpler, where it's like, okay, how can I listen to the messages that I can perceive, which are also influenced by the level that you're at, right? Just as if I try to look at vegetables when I was younger, it wouldn't matter if I looked at it 100 times. I probably would have still not liked it. But 1,000 times, 500,000 times, then the change started happening, where I was like, okay, I like vegetables now. So there is a lot of patience that's needed. And so this journey of understanding the idea of the non-self and the idea of having to live in alignment with the nature of reality is very liberating and can be very powerful. Awesome. All right. Thank you so much for listening. And I will see you all next time.